The highly anticipated FMS Speed has finally been added to our E-Jets family. Our latest version 1.1 marks a huge new milestone because with all the new features like ILS Autotune or the improved and stable LNAV and VNAV, you can now really experience how easy it is to fly a real E-Jet. FMS Speed is a function of the FMS that controls the speed for the autothrottle automatically throughout the flight from takeoff to the landing so that you don't have to. And although this tutorial might seem long, that's only because I will explain exactly what FMS Speed is doing, when and why. However, for you as the pilot, the only thing you need to do in flight is retract the flaps after takeoff and deploy the flaps before landing. And that's it. But under the hood, FMS Speed takes care of managing the speeds for the takeoff, departure and climb. It will switch from NOTs to MACH. It will manage the cruise, descent and approach speeds. And it will also take care of all the speed restrictions along the way, of which there are many. So this feature really brings the E-Jets to a whole new level of automation, and it once again proves what many real pilots say, that the E-Jets are the simplest airliners to fly in real life. Before I go any further, I realize that many flight sim users often jump from one airplane to another, and it might be challenging to remember how to properly fly each one of them. That is why I created a 5-minute E-Jets refresher on our website. This is like a cheat sheet that mentions the most important steps that you need to follow to complete a flight successfully. If you follow the instructions, you'll be spared any frustrations and you'll have a great time every time. Plus, with all the new automatic features, there aren't actually that many things you need to do anyway. After programming the FMS and taking off, and if you don't need to make any changes to your flight plan, you only need to press 2 buttons, spin 1 knob, and use 2 levers to complete the whole flight. Seriously, but I'll cover that in another video. Alright, now let's have a look at how FMS Speed works. I'll first give you the general guidelines and then we'll do a full flight where I'll show you everything in action. So in general, FMS Speed will follow the speed schedules defined on the 3rd page of performance initialization on the FMS. It will, however, keep the speeds in check whenever there is a speed limit. It will start with the lowest speeds for takeoff. It will then keep increasing the speeds based on the flap position while keeping the speeds within the departure limit under a certain altitude. It will follow any waypoint speed restrictions and it will keep you below 250 knots until you reach 10,000 feet. All in accordance with real-life operations. We know that the different airlines might use different speed limits or altitudes, so you can modify all of those values in the FMS during the takeoff performance steps. To change the speed limit below 10,000 feet, go to the climb page and you can change the speed, the altitude, or both. Once we reach 10,000 feet, FMS Speed will gradually accelerate the climb speed and then transition to the cruise speeds. Right before top of descent, it will change to the descent speeds. Before reaching 10,000 feet, FMS Speed will slow down in order to reach 10,000 feet at 250 knots. After that, we'll activate the approach speeds, which will keep decreasing the speeds based on the pilot lowering the flaps. So that's the basic idea, so let me now show you all of this in our flight. By the way, if you're new to X-Craft, you should definitely download our free E-Jets for X-Plane 11 and X-Plane 12. These airplanes used to be payware, but after we released our premium E-Jets family in May 2023, we decided to gift our older E-Jets to the community for free. So head over to our website to start flying them today. Our flight today will be the same as in our demo flight, where I showed you how to manage the speeds manually. And in this video, I'll show you how FMS Speed is going to manage them for you. After you've entered your flight plan on the route page, the next step is performance initialization, which is crucial for setting up FMS Speed. So we'll go to perf init, we'll add some extra fuel. We'll go next, we'll enter our cruise altitude. Our takeoff CG, let's have a look at the EFB. So our takeoff CG today is 22.1. And the zero fuel weight is 38,150. Okay, and we can now see that the vertical profile has been calculated. If we go next, now the 3rd page of performance init is where the speed schedules are defined. You can leave all of these at default, or you can change them either by using the OR button and selecting a different predefined schedule. So if we go to climb speed, or we can select the econ mode, and you'll see that the speed has now changed. Or you can directly enter the speed manually. There we go. And if you want to change the MACH value, you'd start with slash and then write the new value. Or you can enter them both together by writing the whole combination. So let's change the cruise speed to 290/0.76. There we go. Now, this particular combination might not be what the real airlines would use, but all airlines use different values anyway, so I'm just adding this to demonstrate how FMS speed will work. Alright, now we have the climb speed, the cruise speed, and the descent speeds, and we can go next. So we'll keep pressing the right soft key 6 to follow the FMS flow. Here we can leave everything at default. We'll go to the next page. We can also leave this at default. And now here on the takeoff page is where we need to enter the V speeds, which is really important for FMS speed. Now we could either enter them manually, but I'm going to use the EFB to calculate them and send them directly to the FMS, which is not the option that the real pilots would have, but we have that to make your life a little bit easier. So if you go to the takeoff performance, I've already pre-filled all of these. So I'm going to hit compute. And now here we have our V speeds. So I'm going to hit the send to FMS button on the EFB. And now if we go to the data link page, we can load these speeds. So you can see that on the PFD, these values will now populate. And there we go. All right, let's go back to the takeoff page. Now that we've entered our flight plan and the V speeds, we can turn FMS speed on by flicking the switch under the speed knob. This is only possible after you've loaded your flight plan. And you'll notice that the speed indication on a PFD is now magenta and not cyan. And as usual, magenta means that this is now controlled by the FMS, and that will also give you an indication that FMS speed is on. You'll also see that FMS speed is using V2 as our speed for takeoff. Now, I'll also show you the FMS speed table that we have on our website so that you know exactly what's happening. We'll set our initial altitude setting to 9,500 feet. You can do that using the altitude knob, but actually now with our new pop-ups, I prefer just hovering over the value and scrolling with my mouse wheel to change it. So let's do that. Normally, you could set this altitude to your cruise altitude, but I want to show you all the different speeds that FMS speed will give you during the departure. So we're going to level off before 10,000 feet until we leave the SID. All right, let me close the EFB pop-up. And now we can press the toga button. So let's find it right there. And this is crucial because it will set all the correct takeoff autopilot modes. So always press the toga button and then press the auto throttle button to arm the auto throttle. Now, once we take off and we have a positive rate of climb, FMS speed will immediately change the speeds to V2 plus 10. And it will keep that until the acceleration altitude. This altitude is defined as VNAV cap AFE, which stands for VNAV capture above field elevation, and it is on the departure limit page in the FMS. The default value is 1200, and you can always keep it at that. The aircraft will then maintain the lower of the departure speed limit or the flap speed limit. The departure speed limit is defined as above field elevation limit, and it is meant to keep the aircraft below the maximum speed for Class D airspace. The flap speed on the departure is the maximum speed for a certain flap setting, minus 5 knots, ensuring that you always stay below the maximum speed. Now, to demonstrate all the changes, I'm going to lower the speed limit to 200 knots and the above field elevation limit to 2000 feet. However, unless you have ATC giving you some very specific instructions, you can always leave all of these at the default. Alright, and now we are ready to take off. I'm going to close the FMS. I'm going to bring up the PFD. Let's go to the map. Okay. And actually, before I do that, I also forgot to set the right flaps. So if we go back to takeoff, we have flaps too. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's set flaps too. And our pitch trim is going to be 1 degree up. So let's change that. And let's do our final check. Let's press the takeoff config button.
Takeoff, okay.
All right, all good. Ready to go. So we're going to push the throttles fully forward. And now we can see that the auto throttle kicked in. And actually I see that I have the aircraft path visualized in X-plane. Let's turn that off. Perfect. Okay, and as we're rolling down the runway, you pay attention to the speed readout on the top left of the PFD and observe how the magenta number is going to be changing on its own.
V1, rotate V2.
Positive rate of climb, gear up. And we can now see that the speed is now 157, which is V2 plus 10. I'm gonna engage the autopilot. And then now we'll be looking at the radio altitude. And as soon as we hit 1,200 feet, we'll see a VNAV engage. And our speed will increase as well. And now we can see that we switch to flight level change, which is VNAV. And our speed is 200, which is the departure limit which we changed before. So the speed should stay like that until 2,000 feet. There we go. Now we have 210, which is the flap limit for flaps 2. So flaps 2 limit would be 215, but -5 is 210. So if we go to flap 1, we'll see that the speed will jump to 225. There we go. So the aircraft will pitch down so that it accelerates and reach that speed. You can always retract the flaps as soon as you reach the new speed. So we're reaching 225. So I'm going to set flaps clean. And the speed will change as soon as the flap has fully retracted to the new position. Now at this point, the speed would have gone to 250 because we are above the departure limit altitude. However, in our case, our next waypoint has a speed restriction of 230, and that's why FMS Speed is using that as our speed. This is actually something that I missed in the demo flight, where I was already flying at 250 knots here, which was not correct. But FMS Speed makes this very easy because it's always going to make sure that it follows all the procedure speed restrictions on the waypoints. Alright, so now we're just going to continue climbing towards 9,500 feet, which is our altitude setting. And once we level off there, we're going to wait to pass the next two waypoints, which both of them have the speed restrictions. And once we pass the ME685, we'll see how the speed will increase to 250 knots because there will no longer be another speed restriction on the waypoint. However, we are still below 10,000 feet, so that is the maximum speed we can do. And if we have a look at the flight plan page, each waypoint shows us the speed that it's going to use for FMS speed. So we see 230, and that's what we're flying. Alright, and we just passed the waypoint, so you can see that the speed increased to 250 knots. Alright, and in order to speed things up a little bit, let's assume that ATC cleared us to continue our climb straight to our cruise altitude. So I'm going to change the cruise altitude to 31,000 feet. And now we'll see how flight level change will kick in and the airplane will accelerate and start climbing. Now as we pass 10,000 feet, the speed will now increase to the climb speed, and it will happen gradually between 10,000 and 12,000 feet. This, however, is not exactly how it is on the real aircraft, where the speed changes instantly, which we only realized after releasing 1.1.0. On the other hand, you might argue that the gradual acceleration provides a smoother flight experience, so in our next versions, we'll probably make the gradual acceleration optional, while also allowing the true-to-life instant change. And you can now see that our speed increased to our climb speed, which is 263 knots, which is based on the climb speed schedule that we selected on the Perf Init 3 FMS page. Now, if you'd like to change that speed, you can. You can always go back to the Perf Init page and change it to a different value. So let's go ahead and do that. And now here you can change these values again. So for example, I'm going to change it to 280 knots and 0.73 Mach. And you can now see that the speed has updated and we are going to accelerate to 280 knots. You can also create a specific waypoint speed restriction. So for example, if you'd like to cross Oscore at 275 knots, you can set that on the flight plan page. Just keep in mind that this needs to be lower than the speed schedule, otherwise it won't work. So now the speed will stay at 275 knots until we cross the next waypoint, at which point it will go back to the predefined climb schedule. There we go, the speed is now back to 280 and we're flying towards Nesty. Now I realized that I also forgot to change the pressure setting. So let's press standard. Now we can see that we are slightly below the climb profile on the VSD and we'll probably not reach the cruise altitude at the top of climb indication on the VSD. But keep in mind that the top of climb indication is just an estimation. This is calculated when you enter the flight plan and when you fill out the performance pages. This is not dynamic, so when we were doing, we had a level off at 9,500. The VSD did not account for that, that's why it's below. Even if you don't hit it on another flight, that's just totally fine and you don't have to worry about it. Now keep in mind that the automatic switch from knots to Mach will only happen if FMS speed is on. If you're using manual speeds, which you can switch to at any point by the way, then you have to change to Mach manually by pressing the middle of the speed knob. But since we're in FMS speed, you can observe that as soon as this number reaches the predefined climb speed, the units will change automatically. And we have now heard the oral warning that we're 1,000 feet from our cruise altitude. And now we'll see that FMS speed will change to cruise speed, which just happened. And if you want to change that, you can again on the Perf Init page, as we did with the climb speeds. Now this is the point in our cheat sheet where we can take a nap. So we'll fast forward and we'll come back a few minutes before top of descent. Now another great automatic feature that we have since 1.1.0 is the ILS Autotune. We have a separate tutorial about it, but let me also cover it briefly here since this wasn't included in the original demo flight. ILS Autotune is a real feature that will automatically load the correct nav frequency based on the ILS approach that you selected in the FMS. Additionally, ILS Autotune will also trigger the approach preview as soon as the new frequency has been loaded, and once you're aligned with the runway, ILS Autotune will also automatically switch from LNAV and VNAV to localizer and glide slope. This essentially means that to fly an ILS approach, you only need to enter your flight plan and then press one button to arm the approach. In the earlier versions, all those things had to be done manually. Alright, let's see ILS Autotune in action. So this feature is active by default. Autotuning will only happen when you're 150 nautical miles out of the destination airport, or 50 nautical miles if the flight is shorter than 150 miles. And right now we're coming up to 150 miles out, but I already have the correct frequency loaded from my previous flight, so the frequency on the PFD will not change. However, we will see the approach preview overlay on the PFD show up. Again, you can check out our ILS Autotune tutorial to see it there. And there it is. You can now see the approach preview on the PFD. Now this feature is actually really convenient and you won't find this on an Airbus or a Boeing. It shows you the course of the approach overlaid over the LNAV course, making it very easy to see when you'll be aligned with the runway. At that point, you would switch from LNAV to the localizer, but again, ILS Autotune will now do that for you as well. And since we're coming up to our top of descent, I'm going to lower the altitude setting and allow VNAV to initiate descent automatically at the right moment. And we just heard a warning chime telling us that we're 1 minute away from top of descent. And you can also see that our speed has changed to the descent schedule, so the airplane is currently slowing down. So whenever you hear that sound, just double check that you have lowered the altitude setting. And now we can see the magenta diamond slowly coming down. And as soon as it comes closer to the center, the path mode will initiate, and there we go. So the airplane is now automatically starting to descend. And now that we started our descent, this could be a good time to calculate our landing speeds and enter them into the FMS. So let's have a look at the EFB. And let's go to landing performance. Now I'm going to enter the airport. So Vienna, runway 34. Conditions are dry. The wind is 30/5. Temperature 28. Nice and hot. And the pressure is 2991. Alright, and now for the landing weight, the real FMS would actually calculate that for you, but for us we have to make some mental math and calculate it ourselves. Now during the descent, we're flying mostly on idle, so we won't use much fuel. From 30,000 feet, you can expect to burn around 300 kilos or around 650 pounds. So I'm just gonna enter a rough number here, so let's say 44,500. Great, let's compute that. All right, and we now have our landing V-speeds. So I'm going to send that to the FMS. Actually, no, this time I'm going to enter them manually. So we have 135. So we have 135, 140. 165 and 197, and we'll be landing with flaps 5 actually. So let me go back to the landing initialization, change it to flaps 5, and now we have the right flaps. Perfect. All right, great. So now FMS Speed is going to give us the correct approach speeds. Now about the landing weight, what you can also do is have a look at the difference between the next and the destination fuel on the MFD, and you can subtract that value from your gross weight. And the later you calculate this in the descent, the more accurate it will be. Alright, let's fast forward to around 13,000 feet, where I'll tell you about the next stage of FMS speed. Now we're still in our descent stage, so we're flying at 280 knots, but between 12,000 feet and 10,000 feet, the speed will slowly start decreasing so that we hit 10,000 feet at exactly 250 knots. Just remember that, as I said before, on the real airplane this happens instantly. There we go, you can observe that the speed is now slowly coming down. But we can now see that the speed suddenly jumped to 230 knots, and that is because the next waypoint has a speed restriction on it. Speed restrictions always have a higher priority than your current speed, so that is why FMS speed is directly commanding that restriction speed. Now here's where it becomes interesting. At 30 miles out, you'll get a prompt on the flight plan page of the FMS to activate approach speeds. And there we go. You don't need to activate them immediately. We'll wait until we'll be around 20 miles out. Activating the approach speeds will lower the speeds to 210 knots, and subsequently it will lower the speeds based on the flap setting. All you do is change the flaps and the speeds will follow. You can also activate approach speeds directly by selecting flaps 1, which will skip the flaps clean approach speed and it will go directly to 180. And we are now going to align with the runway. You can see that the preview overlay is slowly showing us that we're getting closer to being aligned with the runway. However, notice that it did not switch to the localizer and glide slope, and that is because we didn't arm the approach yet. You can arm the approach earlier or later, it won't really break anything. If you arm it earlier and you're not aligned with the runway yet, ILS Autotune will wait for you to align with the runway and then it will automatically switch. And if you're already aligned, it will immediately switch from LNAV to localizer, which we'll see in a second. And now we can follow the speed management guidelines from our demo. And since we're coming up to 20 miles out, I am now going to activate the approach speeds by pressing the button next to the prompt on the FMS. And I'm also going to arm the approach by pressing the approach button. Now in our case, since we were already aligned with the runway, the switch from LNAV to localizer happened instantly. But we can see that the glide slope didn't engage yet, and that is because we're still flying below the glide slope. So I'm going to adjust the flight path angle so that we fly up a little bit and then intercept the glide slope. Now you don't need to do this. This is just me being slightly impatient, so I want to intercept the glide slope a little bit sooner. But even if you didn't do this, eventually you would intercept the glide slope. Oh, and I just noticed that I forgot to adjust my barometric pressure. There we go. And we can now see that the glide slope is slowly coming down closer to us, although it is very slow. I could also just level off at this altitude and intercept the glide slope quicker, but I'm just going to keep it this way, so it's going to be a very gentle glide slope capture. Alright. Now at around 13 nautical miles out of the destination, we'll select flaps 1, which will set the speeds to 180 knots. Alright, 13 miles out, so we'll do flaps 1. And we can now see that the speed is now 180 knots. The number I'm looking at is right here, so the destination distance. At 10 nautical miles out, I'm going to select flaps 2, which is going to set speed to 160. Let me also set the landing lights. Right, the lights are on. Now we are 10 miles out, so I'm going to set flaps 2. At 8 nautical miles out, we'll do gear down and flaps 3, which was going to slow us down. We're pretty fast right now. Okay, gear down, flaps 3. I'm going to set the auto brake. And at 5 nautical miles out, I'm going to set the landing flaps. So in our case, that is flaps 5, which is most of the time we'll be landing at flaps 5. And this will set the speeds to VAP, which we calculated earlier and entered into the FMS. It's almost there. 5, so let's do flaps 5.
Approaching minimums. Minimum to minimum.
Autopilot off.
100. 50. 40.
Throttle.
30.
Throttle.
20. 10.
And reverse. So here we are again in Vienna, and let's have a quick recap. So you can see that at no point did we have to touch the speed knob. This tutorial might have taken a while, but in reality, all we had to do was enter the V-speeds for takeoff and landing, and then retract or deploy the flaps. FMS Speed managed the speeds for us automatically throughout the whole flight. So let me know in the comments what you think about this feature, and also let me know if you're enjoying these tutorials. It takes me a crazy amount of time to create them, but I want all of our products to come with comprehensive tutorials that will make it easy to learn how to fly them. And if you go to our website, you'll find detailed instructions for all of this as well. See you next time.